So, 2 years ago, we put out a video diving into queer representation, not only in the DCAU, but in DC Comics and their animated properties at large, as well as, I guess, Doom Patrol, which isn't a comic or an animated property. But I digress. While not much has changed since then in terms of the subject matter, with how much we've evolved as content creators, now seemed as good a time as any to revisit the topic and highlight some things I overlooked previously, both about myself and, of course, queer representation in the DCAU. Like, just off the top of my head, did you know that Clayface was gay? Certainly the subtext in his debut episode Feet of Clay must have been clear to some of you, but of course, as is the case with 90s censorship standards, the crew had to be subtle. As a result, Matt Hagen's relationship with his lover Teddy Lupus went over many viewers' heads. The creators had to keep a part of themselves, or perhaps more appropriately, their art, repressed. Don't believe me? Check out this clip from the 25th anniversary special of Batman the Animated Podcast, where Feet of Clay director Kevin Altieri goes into depth on the subject.
It's a tragic end, but then again, only for
his boyfriend?
Yeah. His boyfriend. And that was intentionally a gay relationship too.
Does he throw a whiskey bottle at him in that episode? I feel like I remember that.
This guy comes to the room with like a turkey dinner.
I made you an entire Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Please don't scream at me.
Don't you dare patronize me!
Okay, great. Well, drop the clay down his throat.
It's amazing, isn't it? How something can be sitting right in front of you for 25 years and you don't realize how obvious it is until you hear it from someone else. Like, you always figured that was the case, but you just had to hear someone else validate it. While unfortunate that the crew behind the show couldn't be more direct with the way they handled LGBT issues, it's probably for the best. After all, internal notes that have been made public in the time since the show's original airing go to show that the topic of homosexuality wasn't always going to be handled with tact. It'll break Alan's heart, but Penguin's joke about picking up all the soap in prison is out. From a narrative standpoint though, I feel like the subtlety in the situation actually kind of works. After all, Batman the Animated Series has no shortage of plot lines focusing on actors who've fallen out of grace for one reason or another. We see Simon Trent fall on hard times, unable to get another gig after having been typecast as a result of spending so long of a time in the role of the Grey Ghost. Baby Doll, who can't be taken seriously as an actor due to the fact that she never physically ages, and of course, Matt Hagen himself, the man who knows that his career could be over any moment following a car accident that disfigured his face. Now, add in the fact that he's gay, that's a lot to unpack for the early 90s. And if you want to take into consideration the 40s to 50s era stylization of the series, perhaps being out could have been even more dangerous for the character. I mean, while we as a society have made great progress in the normalization and acceptance of LGBTQIA+ people, which I'll be shortening to LGBT for the sake of brevity going forward, in the almost 3 decades since Batman first aired, even then, safety is still not guaranteed. On June 12th, 2016, just a little over 5 years ago, Omar Mateen walked into Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, killed 49 patrons and wounded 53 others, in not just one of the largest mass shootings in American history, but also the deadliest incidents of violence against LGBT people in the United States. Similarly to how comic publishers reacted in the wake of 9/11, DC Comics came together with IDW to release a 144-page anthology collection, simply titled Love is Love, that brought together over 300 creatives to grieve and honor those lost, with the proceeds being directed to LGBT advocacy group Equality Florida. Among the short stories was one from Paul Dini featuring Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy that took a look at their relationship in a more meaningful way than previous fantasy fulfillment type outings that I mentioned last Pride video. Love is supporting her choices, learning her favorite song, a letter each day, going vegan just for her, enduring the weekly Stooges marathon, surprising her with flowers, and love is always dancing come what may. And love is always dancing come what may. Interestingly enough, this isn't Paul Dini's first foray into LGBT representation in the DCAU. Of course, he was the author of the Batgirl Adventures comic we talked about last time, and was a large part of creating the Harley and Ivy romance through Subtext. Even more recently, he brought that dynamic back around for their appearances in Batman The Adventures Continue, a comic that also seemed to hint at a gay relationship for the Joker with a new character ironically named Straight Man. But queer romance isn't the only bit of the LGBT community that Dini has touched on. Perhaps surprisingly for the year 2002, Dini, along with the help of the late great Hilary J. Bader, introduced the DCAU to its first explicitly trans character in a story that I've grown attached to over the years, Gotham Girls Season 3. Originally conceived as a series of standalone webtoons that would feature the ladies of Gotham, the first 2 seasons of Gotham Girls brought back the voice cast from Batman the Animated Series for slice of life shorts that would run anywhere from 2 to 4.5 minutes long, mainly focusing on solo outings with Harley, Ivy, Catwoman, Zatanna, and Barbara Gordon. The show evolved over time when its 3rd season took on an overarching plot that almost feels like an extended lost episode of the new Batman adventures, just animated in Adobe Flash. Following a break-in at GCPD, all of the men in Gotham suddenly vanish, and in a seemingly unrelated turn of events, the stand-in mayor announces that Detective Selma Riesdale was kidnapped by none other than Catwoman. Despite a lack of trust from the new stand-in commissioner, Batgirl begins to look for clues in the disappearance of the missing detective. And, well,
at least we know why she disappeared when the men did. She is a he.
Ultimately, this exchange was part of why I didn't bring up Gotham Girls in the last video. I'm at this weird place where I want to tell myself, oh, this is certainly progressive for its time. Batgirl continues to use she, her pronouns after the reveal, but simultaneously want to just yell at her for being a fucking TERF, or trans exclusionary radical feminist, for those unaware of the term. Because, well, no, Barbara, she isn't a he. She is a she. I mean, come the fuck on, the are right there. She's obviously been taking hormone treatments for quite a while. Can you even imagine the pain one must endure to finally see a character that's representative of yourself, a side of you that there's so much societal pressure to keep hidden, and in the same breath that the similarity is revealed, one of your favorite superheroes undercuts the moment by basically saying, oh, well, that's just a man in disguise, isn't it? A bit dysphoric, to say the least. Briefly moving from the DC universe, and I promise it'll make sense in a minute, author Pat Cadigan, who may be best known for her 90s Arthur C. Clarke Award winners, Sinners and Fools, published another award winner in 2013 short story, The Girl Thing Who Went Out for Sushi. On its face, the story is about a group of friends working aboard a space colony who went out for sushi, the story's term for surgical reconstruction of bipedal organisms, people like you or me, to literally become any form of aquatic life. Aquatic life that can survive in the outer reaches of space, sure, but still aquatic life nonetheless. Some of them take the form of a crab or an octopus or even a nautilus in order to make their lives a bit more comfortable to live. However, due to the biases of those who haven't gone through the process themselves and remain bipedal, the sushi unfortunately become a political underclass and have a lot of new worries to deal with as a result. It's easy to get lost in the piece due to a plethora of all new vocabulary introduced in order to play into the sci-fi aspects of the tale. It's also easy to see how a casual reader could miss the intent despite being incredibly explicit as an allegory for the trans experience, with passages such as,
"It's the way they're made. Bipeds are strictly binary. It's all they know. 0 or 1, yes or no, right or wrong. But once you turn, that strictly binary thinking's the first thing to go, and fast. I never heard anyone say they miss it. I know I don't."
Or,
"In the old days, when I turned, nobody did it unless they had to. Most often it was either terminal illness or permanent physical disability as determined by the biped standard. For example, conditions at sea level on the third planet out. Sometimes, however, the disability was social, or more precisely, legal.
But make no mistake, the intent is there. In 2018, during a press interview, Pat made it incredibly explicit. I was halfway through it when I realized that I was writing a parable about trans people, because I was drawing on a lot of what my friend Roz Cavaney had told me about the process of transitioning and dealing with your friends and your family and legal things and all the rest of it. So I thought, As I finished it, I showed it to some of my trans friends and they loved it. Of course, as I said already, the girl thing who went out for sushi isn't a DCAU title. Would that it were, the text may have been a bit easier to parse, being set in a world that I'm already familiar with, but I digress. I touch on it here as a preface for a more recent Pat Cadigan outing, Harley Quinn Mad Love, which she wrote in tandem with Paul Dini. As Pat recounts the experience in the same interview as before, working with Paul Dini was like a dream collaboration. He wrote the detailed outline, and I put the flesh on the bones, and we communicated through our editor at Titan, which was the best way to do it. We'd never met personally, and so everyone was in the loop. Everyone knew where everyone was. And there were a few things that I got wrong, and Paul fixed them in the book. Now, if you're watching this video, I can say with almost absolute certainty that you're probably familiar with the story of Mad Love in one form or another. Whether it be the original Batman Adventures comic special, the episode from the new Batman Adventures, or perhaps a second-hand retelling of the events within from a Wikipedia write-up. It is the quintessential Harley Quinn tale, giving the character her origin while going to painful lengths to really highlight the abusive aspects of her relationship with the Joker and the reality of how hard it is to escape from that abuse, both physically and psychologically. However, as far as that certainty goes, I'm almost as sure that the majority of you haven't experienced this version of Mad Love. Making up for some storytelling choices from the past that may have been a bit questionable, Paul Dini and Pat Cadigan's Mad Love modernized the tale in a way that turned Harley into a much more capable and cunning character, reminiscent of her more recent counterparts. While keeping its core intact, the book expands on the classic story in many areas. Readers get to spend more time with Harley's college years, witness how she came to earn the respect of Arkham inmates like Baby Doll, Poison Ivy, March Harriet, and Magpie during her employ at the asylum, and experience an entirely original setup for why she's so adverse to higher authorities, including an examination of her relationship with the police from a young age. There's even an entirely new subplot in which, as a child, Harley was almost kidnapped and sold off as a sex slave. I won't spoil how that one's resolved, but I will say Cadigan has worked off and on in the horror genre for years, and the conclusion was equal parts bone-chilling and cathartic. That said, if it wasn't clear already, there are plenty of details in the 2018 Mad Love that separate this version of the tale from its DCAU counterpart. Perhaps one of the more welcome changes comes from this passage. Rosalind Belafontaine, RN, didn't make a big deal about being Arkham Asylum's first trans woman on the nursing staff. She was innately modest. She had chosen a service profession because the focus was on other people, not herself. But she had also learned to be circumspect. Being trans meant having to be ready to deal with situations that could, without warning, turn hostile or even dangerous. Not just in Arkham, but anywhere. While Gotham City wasn't the Deep South in 1956, it still had hazards for her that cisgender people never had to think about. For example, a neighbor who nodded hello every morning might, on learning you were trans, start slipping death threats under your door. Or a belligerent drunk might follow you down the street calling you it. While only 2 paragraphs long, this excerpt holds a lot of weight. Not only does the passage serve as another point of reference that shows an earnestness in both Dini and Cadigan's allyship of LGBT people, but on a deeper metatextual level, when bringing in the comparison to the Deep South of 1956, 1956, it gives the reader the opportunity to reflect on just how far we've come in regards to trans equality. Not just in the over 60 years from then to now, but even in a shorter time span, as seen with the season of Gotham Girls we spent some time with earlier in the video. Yet, despite the optimism of societal progress, Cadigan and Dini end on the bleak reality that even with the strides made over the decades, trans people remain unsafe, even within the context of a fictional city with a Batman. On the topic of things that change over time, I want to quickly look at a character that doesn't. I've mentioned Baby Doll twice in this video already, and perhaps you're already familiar with the character. After all, despite her lack of mainstream success, she is another Dini creation. When I first began to revisit the DCAU back in the early 2010s, her debut episode, eponymously titled Baby Doll, was one that really stood out to me amongst a sea of I've got Batman in my basements and the Forgottens, though probably not for the reasons you might think. As I'm sure you could deduce for yourself, the way we interact with and interpret media is more often than not informed by our own personal experiences and the way the viewer, reader, what have you, perceives the world as a whole. This is why films like American History X, for example, while being a clear condemnation of white supremacist attitudes, still became a cult classic for modern neo-Nazis. Despite the themes that most people would be able to pick up on, these people see themselves depicted in the film in painfully graphic detail and think, yes, that's us. These are our goals, and god damn do we look cool being depicted as hyper-violent alpha dogs. Even the film's end, despite hammering home the themes of not making judgments based on race, is twisted to fit their worldview, as the final kill in the movie is used to justify their positions. All this to say, almost a decade ago, I was an entirely different person with incredibly different views on the world as a result of an upbringing where sex itself was a taboo, gender discussion was incredibly regressive, and conversations surrounding mental health were slim to non-existent. Through that lens, Baby Doll, the episode, was interpreted as some kind of weird, creepy fantasy Dini had where he was admitting some sort of dark desire for infantilized women, which, looking back on, I'm sure we can all agree is an incredibly silly and non-charitable read of the material. All these years later, however, I see a tale of a woman trapped in a body that she feels doesn't belong to her. A hurt soul lashing out as a result of societal pressure and expectations of how she must perform as a result of occupying said body, and the overwhelming pain that comes with the dysphoria of having a vision in your head of who you are that isn't often reflected in the mirror. I see myself. In 2016, while on the press run for the animated adaptation of The Killing Joke, Kevin Conroy sat down to have a chat with New York Times columnist Jeff Muskus. As part of their interview, the topic came up of Kevin living in New York during the AIDS crisis, and playing the part of Peter Kidd, a TV producer secretly living with AIDS, in the Broadway production of Eastern Standard. The excerpt from the interview is as follows. I went to so many funerals that I felt such a sense of obligation to do it right, said Mr. Conroy, who is gay. During a moment alone on stage, he would break down. Every night, I would just wail, feeling all the pain. I couldn't not feel it. It was a scream of, look what's happening to us, help! To this date, this is the only publication I've ever seen that goes into any kind of depth on Kevin Conroy's sexuality and love life. In fact, misinformation on the subject seems to be widespread to the point where, upon sharing this find a few years back, some fans of the channel expressed hesitance in believing this. Out of curiosity, I reached out to Jeff Muskus for more details on his interview back in 2019. I wasn't expecting a response. After all, this guy works for the New York Times, and I'm just somebody on YouTube making videos about Batman. Though, to my surprise, Jeff was incredibly responsive and was willing to go into more detail with me. Before I sat down with Mr. Conroy, I'd read a Wikipedia entry stating that he had a wife and daughter, so I was surprised when I asked him a question about them, and after a long pause, he responded with, am gay, and went on to speak in great and moving detail about losing a generation of fellow Broadway actors during the AIDS crisis. In follow-up conversations with Mr. Conroy's friends and colleagues, I learned that although this had never been in the public record before per se, it was an open secret in the industry. As far as I know, there never was a wife or daughter. The consensus also seemed to be that Mr. Conroy's partner of many years, who prompted the move to LA, has been a source of life-changing happiness. In fact, after that initial message, Jeff even went back to his audio recordings of the interview to offer more quotes directly from Conroy. Though, since I haven't tracked down Kevin's blessing, it's probably best that I don't share it. I mean, the guy's literally Batman. Who knows what he'd do if I upset him? Just look at him. Sure, he looks like he's having fun at this pride parade, but deep underneath that happy exterior is a really compassionate guy who... Wait. That was a different video. Okay, so this is the part that I've been dreading writing, dreading reading back to the camera, and dreading even letting any of you hear. In fact, believe it or not, once I started getting close to this part of the script, I stopped writing entirely for literally weeks, and decided that I would play the new Resident Evil instead. After all, I marathoned the entire series last year, and I was always going to make time for this game when it came out. But then after beating the game, I started it again. It's fine, it's a short game. I can make the time. And again, trust me, it's fine. I'm spending less time with it every playthrough. And again, but like, it only took me 4.5 hours. That's just an afternoon, no biggie. And again, my personal best record, a little over 2 hours. In fact, at the time of writing, I already started a 6th playthrough, and I intended to see it through to the end, but I really can't put this off forever. I go on vacation this month. This video has a deadline. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? I'm so scared of doing this that I'd much rather spend as much time as I can with a game that's specifically designed to scare the shit out of me, but I'm tired of being scared, at least in this way, so here goes nothing. I am non-binary. I don't know specifically what it was that finally led me to coming to this realization about myself. Maybe it was something I heard from another non-binary or trans YouTuber like Curio or Thought Slime or Philosophy Tube even, that just made me think, oh wait, that's me. Or maybe it was something in the vast ocean of gender politics that is Steven Universe. It could have something to do with the inclusion of more non-binary people in my social circles lately. Or potentially, it could have something to do with the fact that for the first time in the decade or so since reaching adulthood, I finally had time this past year to sit down and start untangling the twisted web that is me. Thanks, Corona, I guess. I really don't even know what more to say here, but I'm feeling like it probably should have been obvious to me for much longer than it has been. I keep looking back at all of these moments in my life, moments that are commonly referred to by others who've gone through the same thing as egg moments, and just thinking, oh, like, for Christ's sake, I've spent the last 15 years or so with a nickname that was specifically given to me in high school to obfuscate the possibility of being perceived as a man when being spoken of to people who didn't already know me. Like, I was sitting on the street corner with my friends who were calling their boyfriends who wouldn't want them to know they were hanging out with a guy. They started calling me Maddie. Wanted their boyfriends to think they heard them him say Maddie. And I took that shit and I ran with it because it felt so much more me than Matthew ever did. That's right, you've all been secretly validating me this entire time, and none of you knew it, not even me. Surprise! Honestly though, I don't know what else to tell you. Not a lot is going to change, or at least I wrote that in my script and I don't know that for a fact. Like maybe I'll be more comfortable wearing nice floral shirts like this, or asking my fiance to help me with my eyebrows, or maybe do some makeup or something. But at the end of the day, I'm still me. I've just learned something new about myself and then sat on it for the last 8, 9, 10 months now, maybe. I was terrified to talk about it, but once I let it slip to members of my family, and so close before Pride Month, I felt as though it's something I have a responsibility to be open about. After all, I've always seen the role of being a creator as a method of sharing and relating with the audience, as a means of letting us both feel a bit less alone. With my band, that's usually manifested in sharing my more personal, anxious, depressed moments. And while that opportunity doesn't arise as much with the content we typically make, I wanted to take the opportunity to do so here, because maybe being open about me could ultimately help some of you to find comfort working through something similar, if not the same exact thing. I'm just tired of acting like I'm something that I'm not.
I'm not an actor anymore. I'm not even a man.
I'd like to think that in our time on YouTube, we've fostered a really open-minded and caring community with this channel. So I'm sure that there are a lot of comments of support down under in the Australia box. But given that this video is releasing while I'm on vacation to see family and friends back down south, as well as record new music and hunt for wedding venues, I don't know that I'll be available to respond to comments as they come in. So I just wanted to put out a blanket just thank you to all of you for your support now and over the years. It really means the world. It's been a wild journey doing this for the past 4 or so years, and I'm so glad I've gotten to share the journey with you all. We've got a lot more exciting stuff in the works, and I can't wait for you all to see it. So, you know, be sure to do all the normal YouTube things, right? Subscribe, hit the notifications bell, and while you're at it, go ahead and leave comments and likes if you haven't already. Whatever you feel is necessary. But until next time, I've been Maddie Washburn. This has been the Watchtower Database, and we'll continue to stay those things so long as you continue to stay you. And remember,
trans rights are human rights.
And love is always dancing, come what may. No. Oh my god. Oh my god, it's all over the wall. Can you bring me a towel? James, I don't know what to do this late in the game to make it different. It's gonna smell like eggs and shit.